Well, I think those who are trying to deny what the result was, and by the way, we've got some here who still can't recognise the fact that we voted for Brexit and would like to reverse it. It's the same phenomenon, it's the same kind of people, it's those who've been in love with the liberal media elite, and I think it's quite disgusting to try to get delegates to reverse their votes today, of all days. I don't believe it's going to happen. It would be absolutely monstrous if it did.
When you talk to your neighbors about freedom, when you talk to your pastor about standing up for what's right, you intensify the fires of liberty that are already raging across the globe. Now, the globalists are pouring on all the heat they can, pushing their hive mind, Borg, collectivist, zombie public system. So we are in an absolute pitch battle. We are swinging muskets here, toe-to-toe with the globalists. They're bloodied, we're bloodied. It is absolute, total war.
Hello and welcome to episode 6 of Tipple Talks. Today we have a very special episode where we will have our second guest.
Let's talk.
Yeah, Let's Talk, aka JJ. And we had a really good interview with him, and we talked about a range of issues from Syria, Trump, media, and State of the Labour Party, and some domestic issues.
And if you agree or disagree with what he has to say, you can find him on, he's got a YouTube channel, it's Let's Talk. He's also on Facebook and Twitter, and we'll put his links in the description of this podcast. So I hope you enjoy.
Let's go. Let's start with Syria. The whole issue of Syria and what's been happening with Aleppo and how the media's been portraying it. You haven't really uploaded a video on that yet. At least I didn't see on your channel.
No.
But what are kind of your thoughts about how the conflict is being portrayed, particularly the last couple of weeks, and just generally what your thoughts are on the Syrian conflict?
Yeah, I think the Syria issue points out a lot of issues when it comes to how people perceive the news, really. Now, although I have a page where I talk about politics and things, I always say that, I'm not a political expert. I've only literally recently got into politics, so a lot of my views, I consume them the same way as a person in the street would consume them. And what I've seen is a lot of mixed messages in regards to what's actually happening in Syria. So rather than giving you guys a kind of educated opinion of what's happening, I think what's indicative of the whole situation is that a lot of people just don't know what to believe. When, 1 minute people are freedom fighters and the next they're terrorists. 1 minute all the civilians are being allowed to leave. The next minute they're getting kind of having illegal weapons used on them. So I think the easiest thing for me to say is that it's pretty obvious that there's wrongdoing on all sides here, and it's politically a very difficult situation, I would say, to try and kind of eradicate or solve, because no matter what side you look on, for me, it seems to be that there has been some wrongdoing on that part. I would say that the way that Assad seems to be kind of bombing his citizens seems pretty abhorrent to me, and people haven't been allowed to leave. But on the other side of things, there is research that does say that we have been arming people that are linked to Al-Qaeda. So it seems like a very messy situation where really the only ones that suffer are the civilians that are trapped in that place. And while people are trying to play geopolitical games, and we see it widening with people like Turkey and Iran and Russia being involved, it's just very confusing to people, and a lot of it does seem to mirror what we saw with Iraq, really. So rather than give you guys, like I say, a point of view where I know what's going on, I give you the opposite. I'm very confused because of all the players involved, because of all the games that are being played before. Really, it leaves a lot of people quite confused as to what's happening. I don't know if you guys know more than I do, I'd be very interested to know if you guys do, and if you guys have a kind of I don't want to say a side so much, but I just think a lot of this confuses people. They don't know what to believe unless they have a partisan belief and this side's bad, that side's bad. I just find the whole situation quite depressing, but also very consuming for a lot of people, really.
Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head there about how people feel in general. And I would go as far to say that even the politicians who are kind of orchestrating the policy towards Syria are confused themselves.
Yeah.
And no one really knows kind of the full extent of what's happening in Syria and what will eventually unfold.
Yeah.
But one of the things, I don't know if you saw the clip of George Osborne in the House of Commons.
Yeah.
Basically saying, look, this is what happened if we don't intervene. Assad will continue his massacre of civilians, and Russia will exploit the vacuum left by us in the Middle East. This is the consequence of us not shaping the world.
But let's be clear now that if you don't shape the world, you will be shaped by it.
I've seen that, but what I would say is, and I've seen Theresa May talk about the same thing, is they seem so concentrated on regime change. It makes me feel like they have insidious reasons why they want to get involved in this. And when you look at the Middle East, or you look at places like Libya, they've been so focused. Yemen, where we are now, where these kind of African and Middle Eastern countries, we're just so focused on regime change rather than actually the kind of well-being of citizens. It does make me feel like there are insidious reasons to go in there when we do know that some parts are resource-rich, or some parts are gateways for oil pipelines or whatever. I think it's very kind of naive for us to think that it's our kind of altruistic thought of wanting to kind of help everyone that's in need and being the world police. I don't think it's down to that.
That's another good point. You talk about Yemen, and that wasn't mentioned by Osborne. I mean, we're involved in Yemen, not directly, but definitely through the sales of arms to our ally Saudi Arabia. So the idea that we've kind of isolated ourselves from the Middle East is nonsense. We're actually heavily involved in the region, and my opinion is one of the reasons why this chaos is unfolding is because of not because of a lack of kind of Western involvement, but because we've made terrible decisions in that region, and we continue to do that.
Most definitely. I think as well, and I don't mean to sound like I'm trying to sound like the smartest person in the room, but I think also what I try and do whenever I'm looking at politics and looking at situations like this, you always have to take a step back and try and go as far back as you can, because sometimes you have to look into the past to see what's happening. And a lot of people, I don't think even, I understand, and I take up interest in politics, is that these are a lot of this geopolitical kind of posturing as well, and narratives are being created, and bad men and boogeymen are being created, and martyrs are being created, and sometimes you have to be aware of the fact that you might be kind of looking at information that looks a certain way but is nothing like that. So I know when I'm on Twitter, I have a lot of different people that I follow from different parts of the country, and different views, and Assad supporters and people that are against him, and it's so confusing. I don't know how anybody could claim to make sense of it when they're literally completely opposite sides of the same story being presented in front of you. How do you make an informed decision? It's very hard. And
that's kind of the thing that I've taken away from recent events is, and also from the last 10 years, is there is actually no such thing as a humane war. Yeah. Whichever side conducts violent conflict, there's casualties involved, it's bloody, it's brutal. Yeah. So the idea that the West can somehow conduct a clean war is kind of nonsensical.
But can I just say, I understand, that our efforts in regime change haven't gone very well in the past at all. But I also think that on the flip side, that fear of things that have gone wrong in the past can then lead to paralysis in the present. So we can't just be scared of what happened in the past and then sit back and do nothing. So I think politicians in Westminster have this kind of dichotomy where they don't want to repeat the mistakes of the past, but they also feel like they should act. But public opinion is so against any intervention anymore that they just feel it's political kind of suicide to act, even if it's the humane thing to do. And I think that might have been what went wrong in Syria. If we'd have got in there earlier, then maybe it wouldn't be in such a dire state that it is now. I think it was good in some ways that Ed Miliband last year in the vote in the Commons block the airstrikes until we knew what the end game was.
Yeah.
But at the same time, you know, hindsight is a beautiful thing. We didn't know that Russia was going to come in then, but now Russia is in. It's even worse than it would have been if we would have gone in with the US earlier on. So it's difficult.
Well, I agree with your point, and I think you're right. The only thing is, and when we talk about our fears kind of impeding us on making decisions in the future, is that also it's not only the decisions that we have to look at, it's the decision makers. And really, when I look at our kind of cabinet and I look at people like, you know, Philip Hammond and Boris Johnson and Theresa May and their record and the way they've acted, I can't really see that they will do things that will benefit the citizens when in regards to taking on that situation or putting in a kind of democratically elected leader that isn't a puppet. So although I do agree with what you're saying, we shouldn't let our fears kind of impede our progress. I think we also have to be quite mindful of who is making the decisions and what their motivations might be. It's all good having a new government in place in Syria, but if it's implemented by people like, you know, Theresa May and people within the American administration, which that might be a difficult thing now when we've got Rex Tillerson, who is a massive advocate of Russia, we have to wonder about who's going to be put in Syria, and is it going to be destabilised a la Iraq if we do make the same decisions? I think if you look at Theresa May's background so far, she seems to be quite hard-headed into just continuing with a lot of the same Tory traits that we've seen for the last 10, 20, 30 years. So I doubt her implementation of foreign policy will be anything different radically than what we've seen. Really, all we see is her jumping into bed with theocrats to get more money and trying to maybe implement governments that will please them, rather than kind of putting into place a government that will actually try and unite Syria. So that's my only kind of fear I have around that situation, really. And
but then I think you also made a good point as well, which is that we're not the world's police anymore, and maybe we shouldn't be. Maybe you know, in some the only good thing I could say about Trump perhaps coming president, if he means it, is that they won't intervene so much in other countries, and maybe, you know, we don't want to leave people to suffer, but it's not the West's job to get involved in every conflict in the world, and sometimes by doing that we're making things worse.
I think as well, it's always quite ironic how we just kind of pick the genocides that we decide are kind of worthy of kind of giving press attention and giving loads of troops over and bombing this and bombing that, but we don't talk about places like kind of Congo where things are happening and South Sudan. We don't want to talk about those areas because maybe we control resources or we're all right with the government. Well, these are things we need to talk about. You can't be selective in your outrage. If I've got 3 highly aggressive men on my street, for instance, and two of them pay me rent and the other one doesn't, and I only concentrate on one aggressive man, it's quite obvious what my maybe motivations might be in regards to getting this man out of his house so I can get a new tenant in. Do you know what I mean? So, I think we've got to think about the reasons why we're doing this. I am not advocating that one side is better than the other. What I am talking about is our involvement needs to be kind of fair and just, and not have some kind of weird agenda to it that a lot of people might not know. It's very easy, it's very easy for people to get confused when, you know, you talked about Ed Miliband blocking the vote, but then another person will say, well, I didn't really see that, but what I did see was Hillary Benn giving this speech about why we need to, you know, invade militarily, and we don't really hear anything apart from that. So I think the messages from Syria, I mean, we've got people like Gary Johnson, I know it's a bit of a tangent, but Gary Johnson in America, you know, a relatively, you know, prominent political figure, didn't even know what Aleppo was or where it was. I mean, that is the lack of knowledge that we see around these situations.
Who's Aleppo?
Yeah, what's an Aleppo? This is the kind of, you know, libertarian leader and stuff. This is the major candidate that doesn't know a thing. I think I read a thing today. Donald Trump has never tweeted about Aleppo, or never mentioned the word Aleppo in his tweets. So this is the kind of level that we're coming from. And really, when our political leaders don't know what's going on, I think it's very difficult for people that are kind of, you know, uninformed on this situation, which I will be completely honest about. I don't have probably the most well-rounded view of it, but what I have seen, it makes me think that nobody really knows what's happening, and what we're seeing now is a lot of posturing. But while we see this posturing, a lot of lives are being lost, which is, you know, awful on any side of the battle, really.
But I also saw your post that you disagreed with Peter Thatchell interrupting Jeremy Corbyn.
Yeah.
And Peter Thatchell was accusing Jeremy Corbyn of double standards by, you know, saying we shouldn't be intervening, but then not really condemning the Russian bombing of Syrians. But I was just wondering why you disagreed with his intervention.
Hundreds of thousands of lives are at risk. We expect the leader of the Labour Party to speak out and demand a vote in Parliament on UK aircraft. We will leave it in.
A couple of things, really. First, I would always say challenge the government first. And I mean, people have made some good points that maybe Peter Thatchell would Tatchell, would not get as close to Theresa May, but I've not seen any efforts or anything from Peter Tatchell, which it might exist. So if it does, I stand corrected. But I've not seen a strong attack on the Tories in regards to what they're doing in the Middle East and in Africa. How can we can talk about Aleppo, but look what people are doing in Saudi. People are getting their heads chopped off over there. Do you know what I mean? And the lack of women's rights and gay rights. Saudi Arabia is maybe even a worse situation than Aleppo at the moment in regards to the famine that's going on in Yemen. So I thought that he was attacking the wrong person. And when you were talking about I'm not saying that Jeremy Corbyn is immune from criticism. Maybe he should be a bit more vocal about it. But I did see Jeremy Corbyn on the Andrew Marr show talk about that. Russia and Syria were committing war crimes and it should be looked into. So it's not like he's been completely silent on it. But when you've got one man that's saying we need to look into this, it's obvious Jeremy Corbyn's anti-war. And then just one candidate saying that we need to push for peace and have a solution that works for everybody. When you've got one person saying that and you protest that person, and on the other side you've got someone saying that, well, we can let them do their own internal investigations, or we need to take a step back, or someone that's really on the fence or quite aggressive towards other forces. I don't see why Peter Tatchell kind of thought it was the place and the time to kind of attack a candidate that he might be more ideologically aligned with, rather than the government, who are kind of pretty much in bed with quite theocratic or aggressive regimes. I just didn't. It just struck me as quite a self-publicised move where, fair enough, you'll get some more appearances on Sunday morning television, but really has it benefited your cause massively? And are people talking about what Labour and the Conservatives should be doing in Aleppo? I don't think so. I think the reason why we see it talked about maybe in the last couple of days is because tensions have heightened, but I don't think Peter Tatchell's 5-man or woman protest has anything to do with that at all, really. He's free to do that, and if another time he would have protested Jeremy Corbyn, whatever, that's your right. I just think that really it harmed all the kind of progressive sides of the argument and gave very little pressure to the very government that can affect what we do and how we do it in Syria, really.
Yeah, so his efforts would be better served by uniting against the government rather than telling each other. Yeah,
I've noticed this a lot about kind of left-wing people since I kind of got into politics, that we kind of have a thing about attacking ourselves and before we even get our story straight. So, right, it's like me attacking you for views and me just double check, okay, so what do you actually think? Okay, well, fair enough. But I think Peter Tatchell really was maybe misguided in his attack on Corbyn and people like Emily Thornberry and stuff who have talked about this, rather than actually realising, well, they're probably on my side regarding this. How about I get on a platform with them and we talk about it, rather than I attack them and lose an ally in my kind of fight for kind of justice for the people of Syria, really.
And another thing is that I think the audience he was aiming at is kind of it doesn't really do anything for his cause. I mean, the people who he is protesting to, like Labour members and people who would kind of watch BBC News, politics, whatever, they're already quite informed about what's going on. Yeah. And I think a better demographic to target if you want to raise awareness is, the general public at large, people who aren't engaged in what's going on with foreign policy and world politics more generally.
Yeah, definitely. And I think if you look at the wider view and how people, especially the more right you go, I think Peter Tatchell would be looked at as some kind of like pathetic. So this is not my views. I'm just saying what people might think of it. That he's just some kind of pathetic social justice warrior, and he's talking about things that don't concern us. So rather than kind of solidifying, your friendship or your agreement with people on your side, I feel like Peter Tatchell's actually alienated people that agree with him, which is a terrible situation. And I think it's indicative of a lot of issues when it comes to left-wing politics, but specifically on this issue, I think Peter Tatchell's put himself in kind of a grey area where he's lost a lot of support, and a lot of people just think, oh, what an idiot, and Jeremy Corbyn looks stupid too. Great stuff. I think it was just a weird thing for him to do, and I think he obviously didn't calculate it as well as maybe something he might have done in retrospect, really.
It took my attempted citizen's arrest of President Mugabe for the Daily Mail, of all papers, to hail me as a hero. My human rights is without fear or favour. I've tried to get Henry Kissinger prosecuted on war crime charges over the indiscriminate bombing of Cambodia during the 1960s and 70s, tried to get legal actions against various Israeli leaders over the mistreatment and abuse of the Palestinians. I don't pick and choose. To me, all tyrants need to be challenged.
So I was thinking, we move on kind of closer to home now, another tweet I saw of yours, which I actually kind of agree with, is when you were saying you think Jeremy Corbyn may have won the last 5 PMQs, but you wouldn't really get that sense by watching the news at 10 o'clock. I was just wondering, I think his style, especially since Theresa May became Prime Minister, his style seems to have changed a bit in Prime Minister's questions. He's been a bit more on the offensive. His questions aren't all, questions from members of the public, and he seems to have a more, coherent argument when, arguing against the government. I just wondered what you thought.
Yeah, most definitely. I think with Jeremy Corbyn, he was new to this whole kind of leadership thing, and looking, as someone that's been vlogging for a while, I think I've made like 200 odd videos. If you look at my first videos compared to the videos I make now, I probably sound and look a bit more knowledgeable and coherent and confident, because that's what time gives you. It gives you a chance to learn what you're doing and, create a style and stuff and get with people that you can bounce off. So it would be worrying if he'd kind of, gone back in regards to his performance. I think it's quite... if you're a Jeremy Corbyn supporter, obviously, it's quite encouraging that his performance is improving. But what I do think it's down to is that the Tory government, and I don't want to, discredit Jeremy Corbyn here, they are quite an easy target to hit, really. So it would be quite worrying if he wasn't doing this. But I think his performance has improved, and I think this year of kind of the whole leadership battles has toughened him up and has made him realise that he was making maybe certain mistakes, and he is making him hit people quite hard when it comes to PMQs. I like the way how Angus Robertson asks questions in PMQs where he's quite succinct, and he does he asks for closed answers, so it does kind of trap you. I think what I would try and do in PMQs if I was Jeremy Corbyn is ask quite a lot of closed questions where it does put the Prime Minister in a situation. I think he did this, on Wednesday, was, I want a yes or a no answer, and fair enough, it can waste a question or two, but I think what he does highlight is the ineptness of a government and also the inability to provide a reasonable answer. So I think he's just realising that he's figured Theresa May out, and also he's got a lot more weaker performer in the chamber in Theresa May than David Cameron. I don't think I've seen a Prime Minister or a politician struggle in front of the microphone as much as Theresa May has done. I think it's down to her being not good enough for the role, and that's just my personal opinion. But also, she's running a government that, if you look through, and I said this in all my videos, look at all the different departments in our country, whether you want to talk about education or health or security or foreign policy or even our firemen or our, these are all government parts of government that are really failing and coming under some serious pressure. And if you are a government that knows how to run the country, maybe 1 or 2 departments would be floundering, but we're seeing here that no matter where you look, the Tories are really running places into the ground. So I think the ineptitude of the Tories, with Jeremy Corbyn kind of developing as a leader, is seeing his performance improved. Unfortunately, I don't think that many people take any notice of Prime Minister's questions. They don't play it back on the news. You see more right-wing outlets not even tweeting about when Jeremy Corbyn is successful. So I think, if I'm being honest, within our echo chamber, we can see that Jeremy Corbyn has done better. I don't think that's made much inroads in regards to public opinion because they haven't seen that for different reasons. So I think we've got to be realistic about his performance improving and him getting better as a leader and his oratory skills improving, but we have to be more realistic in the fact that I don't believe, though, that enough people in the general public have seen this change in Jeremy Corbyn and still see the kind of scruffy, bumbling bloke that wants to kind of disarm a trident, and they think he wants to go and hug a tree, and we're going to think money trees are coming out of the ground. I still think that perception stays, even though he's improved as a leader.
Well, I'd agree. Compared to David Cameron, Theresa May does come across as quite weak, and she's often spiteful for no reason, just for the sake of it. But I think Jeremy Corbyn's now starting to realise that as much as Prime Minister's questions is a serious, opportunity to hold the government to account every week, it's also a show, and you need to have these kind of these headline statements. So I know on Wednesday he shouts at Theresa May, "Get a grip," and then that's what you see on the paper the next morning. Jeremy Corbyn tells Theresa May to get a grip. So he needs to, if he's more offensive like this, then he will get noticed more for what he's saying.
Definitely, and I think an interesting point that we need to realise as well is, I know people are going to go, "What are you talking about, JG?" And I know when I've talked to my friends that are into politics, they go, "No, that's not the way we need to go." I think sometimes you need to look at what people that are winning elections are doing, not replicating their style, but people like Donald Trump and Nigel Farage, they have these buzz lines that people can, resonate with. I'm not saying that Jeremy Corbyn needs to go up there and tell her to F off or anything, but I would say the main lines that came out of last week's PMQs was the kind of, FO, FFS, and Jeremy Corbyn saying, "Get a grip." It wasn't about, the funny acronyms or talking about kind of, borders, and it was about people saying get real, get a grip, FF. That's what people kind of tend to go, hey, wait a minute, what's that about? So I think Jeremy Corbyn maybe does need to, I'm not saying that use colloquial language every sentence, but maybe use language that will resonate with people. As she does need to get a grip, FO, people do want Boris Johnson to FO. These kind of things I think you need to sneak in, in order to get people that are maybe politically apathetic on board and listening to what he's saying, because I think I listened to Jeremy Corbyn bang on about and I think it is an important issue, but we need to realise the kind of sphere we're in. He used about 2 or 3 questions about the posters of Directors Union, and I kind of know a little bit about that, but it confused me, and I know about politics. That was my snapshot of Jeremy Corbyn, I'd be like, what is this guy talking about? Switch the channel. I think him going back to domestic issues as a rule, really, mostly, and using this kind of language will help him a lot in the future, I reckon.
You mentioned Farage and Trump and their kind of rhetoric style. I saw an article in The Guardian yesterday that Labour are planning to relaunch Jeremy Corbyn as a left-wing populist.
Yeah.
Do you think this kind of style, this kind of approach will help close the gap in the opinion polls? And do you think that Corbyn can actually win the general election in 2020? Big question, I know, but...
Yeah. We have to look at the fact that politics is very unpredictable at the moment. And from the start, I said Donald Trump could win, and I didn't think he would win. I think Jeremy Corbyn can win if things change. If I'm completely honest now, if things stay the way they are, they're not going to change. Now, without me talking for 15 minutes, because I think it's quite a difficult situation to explain, there are a myriad of reasons why Jeremy Corbyn wouldn't win at the moment. Now, he does need to take on this kind of left-wing populist thing, but I think he needs to actually get his message straight. Labour confuse people. I'm honest about me being a Labour Party member, but when one minute you hear one person saying one thing, where it's Diane Abbott, who's quite liberal in regards to her stance on immigration, then you see someone like Andy Burnham come out the very next day and seem quite right-wing about it. It just confuses people. It does nothing for the party. I don't know if how it works, but if you can just say to people, if you're going to have these views that are against the party line, just don't speak in public or be so critical. I know people go, well, that's just disingenuous. Well, it's called politics, really. You have to operate like that in regards to getting a swell of votes and a swell of enthusiasm about your campaign. But if people are just saying things that are opposite, it confuses people, really. So I think the first thing Labour need to do is get their message on board where every single person is singing from the same hymn sheet, pretty much. I'm not saying there are not going to be some dissenting voices. That's politics, and you're controlling a lot of different MPs. But I think, getting that message on board is the first thing they need to do. If I was the Labour Party, I would start a campaign like people have never seen before, a lot like Barack Obama did, but I would concentrate on a lot of people who have never voted or don't vote, get teams out there all over the country, registering people, running seminars, getting people politically active and involved. I would be doing things like letting people know about the Migrant Impact Fund and drawing up plans about how your area might look under a Labour government and the cuts that have been made. But Labour don't seem to want to tell people how bad Tories are, apart from just saying it. Well, show people and tell them why you're different. Get them signed up, get them in contact with their local MPs, do all these things, go to your local sports days, and I'm not saying that Labour MPs don't do this, but it needs to be a consistent thing where Labour is seen as the voice of the community and it's a grassroots movement. Although I'm a fan of Momentum to a degree, and I think they do some really good stuff, I think in a way that name is being twisted quite a lot, where the party also itself has to get involved with communities. It is, when we're talking about vast amounts of people not voting, really, I don't think Jeremy Corbyn needs to concentrate on the UKIP and the Tories so much. One argument I have made is that you can't win every vote, and why do Labour candidates always have to compromise themselves just to win over voters that they're probably not ideologically aligned with anyway? Why don't you actually try and get people off their asses for once, sorry for my language, and get them out to vote for something that you can give them a hope for, rather than voting for people that really see was I read an article on the Independent the other day, and I always scroll down to the comments to see what people think, and it seemed like these people were pretty intelligent people, but there was still the view that Labour crashed the economy. Now, if we look at statistics, I don't have them in front of me, unfortunately, but the Tories have borrowed more than every Labour government combined, if I'm correct. They have borrowed a hell of a lot of money. They have give corporate tax breaks to a lot of people. These are things that people seem to forget or don't want to acknowledge. So these are things that the Labour Party have to do. Educating people on things like socialism. It needs to be a vastly run campaign, taking from people like Obama and Sanders and Trump, I think politicians and people that are into politics, we all need to be kind of Frankensteins of politics and taking the best ideas from different places and using what works and kind of building on that. And the Labour don't do that, they might get wiped out, because as grey as the Liberal Democrats are, at least people know that, well, they ain't for the EU, they don't want to be, they ain't for Brexit, they definitely don't want to be in Brexit. We know that about Lib Dems. We know they'd probably sell you out on the way to doing that, but we don't really know anything about Labour.
We've seen their numbers rising in the polls this week, and Labour now 11 points behind the Tories, and Lib Dems gone up. So maybe their clear-cut message is working.
Yeah, I think I'm going to do a video, if I'm better, later on about what Labour needs to do. And I think I saw someone put a really good point about Labour maybe just need to have a very, it was like a four-pronged approach, I think it was. And Labour needs to talk about how they're going to have a people's Brexit and stuff. And if we do have Brexit, that it does protect certain things that people hold in place. And maybe if you give it to people like, I can't remember what it was now, but just like saying we're going to protect your human rights and I can't remember what it was, but it was very interesting the way how if Labour put it forward that we will exit the European Union, but we will protect certain things, that if you vote for us, you will not be voting for a blind Brexit. We will fight for your workers' rights and all these kind of things. That might be a good way for Labour to go, but as someone that's from up north, I know there's a lot of people in these towns and cities that just had enough. They still see Jeremy Corbyn as like a Liberal elite, and they don't want to know about Diane Abbott and Emily Ford. They don't want to know about those people. It might seem quite bad for me to say, and I know people think that because I support Jeremy Corbyn, I can't be realistic about it, but we have to be honest in the fact that people like that, and I don't mind Diane Abbott and people like Emily Ford, but those people are seen as London-centric, and they do turn a lot of northern voters off. So if Labour are going through that, I think we need to be looking at people like Clive Lewis and Cat Smith and Angela Rayner and Richard Bergen's, people that maybe need to speak to northern voters in particular to get them back on side, because putting people like Diane Abbott and Emily Thornberry in front of them, even though maybe their hearts might be in the right places, I think even when you look at Diane Abbott sending her son to private school, well, you can't talk to me about private schools, because if you think that they're so bad, why is your son in one? That ends you from the get-go. Really, I think Labour need to be clever about who they're putting out, why and where. Until they start doing that, they're going to massively struggle in my view. Yeah,
I watched a clip of Paul Mason a while ago, and he was basically saying that he sees Jeremy Corbyn as like a holding candidate who can kind of bring Labour to a left-wing position and then pave the way for younger candidates to then take over, like Clive Lewis, etc. Which was a good point. But you mentioned momentum there. I think, Labour have this great advantage of being the biggest party in Western Europe, and this opportunity to kind of mobilise people and to re-energise political activity on a grassroots level. But, I don't know if you know about the recent developments in Momentum. It's kind of tearing itself apart. And it just seems like, again, the left, as you were saying before, has returned to kind of infighting, and I don't know if I can visualize Labour coming together and winning in the near future because of this.
It's so frustrating as someone. I've met a lot of people from Momentum. I did a talk at a Momentum event one time, and I can honestly say that I'm not saying that these are people aren't in Momentum and stuff. It's obvious that there are people from the Socialist Workers' Party and maybe AWL that are quite hardcore for the organisations that are coming into Momentum and maybe making things quite difficult. But what I will say from what I've seen is that the people I spoke to being people just like me. No one's been talking about overthrowing governments and doing all this kind of anarchist type stuff and bringing communism back. No one's even mentioned
But that's the split in Momentum, isn't it? You've got the majority of members are young people, people who want change, and then you've got a minority, a hardcore minority, who turn up to all the meetings and who are able to sit through 2 hours of kind of political debate and vote on things, whereas the young people are kind of less engaged at that level, but more engaged in new forms of politics. And that's kind of the split, and it's kind of unfortunate to see.
I listened to a podcast. I don't know if you guys listen to Navarra Media.
I listened to that one on Momentum.
Yeah, that was a really good podcast. Explaining kind vast party in regards to its political ideology. So when you look at even like groups like Progress, I'm reading the Alex Nunn's book at the moment, the candidate, and he's coming on my channel in the new year actually to talk about the kind of inner workings of the Labour Party. And, Progress have done some quite right-wing things within the party and had people kind of deselected in one way or another and parachute their own kind of, there has been things at both sides of the party that are pretty, I would say disagreeable, but when you take someone that's come from and I don't really know a lot about the organisation, but say the AWL, and you take someone that's to the right of the party, that's a lot of centre ground to try and make up. It's a lot of centre ground to try and make up.
I think both here and in the US, political parties, if you have that many people in one group, they're all going to have, like any family, any company, you're going to have different views. So I think, as long as you're focused around a core ideology, then there's going to be splits off that. And you see the same in the Tories. If you even take Brexit, for example, those who are for hard Brexit, those who are for a soft Brexit, or like the issue of equal marriage a couple of years ago when, almost half of the Tory MPs were against it. There's always going to be this kind of split. And I think if Labour wants to unite everyone around one viewpoint, it will be impossible. I think they just need to have some core values which they can all subscribe to win the election.
I think the problem is that a lot of the core values that the left might have, I think that people that will say they're centre-left or moderates will simply not agree with, and that's because of the ideology difference, and the people that might be opposed to that have quite big voices in the media. So I don't want to go around mentioning people, but even, prominent Labour MPs that are maybe to the right and maybe coming towards not being on the front bench, while there is quite a left-wing presence within the party. People like, Yvette Cooper or Chuckle or Andy Burnham or Liz Kendall, people that are to the right of things, they do have quite prominent names within the party. So if ideologically they are opposed to an idea and are vocal about it, that will get a lot of press attention. So I don't know how Labour are going to combat that when there are a lot of these people are voting for benefit cuts and, do want to work closely with the city and do want to be in bed with people like Murdoch. Whilst you have that kind of such radically different views on quite easy issues, it's very difficult to bring a party like that together, and that's the difficulty with Labour, is that the more I've looked into some of these politicians and their ideology, I don't think they're actually even centre left. Some of them, I don't think they're like hard right, don't get me wrong, but I think they are, quite. It's like Barack Obama, he's probably as far to the left as you can go before you kind of go into being centrist or right wing. I think that's the issue the Labour Party have, and that's why I think there needs to be agreements made. I know a lot of my supporters might not like this, they like me on Facebook and things, but I would say for instance for Trident, I'd be willing to let that go if someone like Jeremy Corbyn could control Trident, for instance. I think you've got to kind of pick your battles and think, well, a lot of the people that I speak to wouldn't vote for Corbyn just because of Trident, just because of that. And I think sometimes if you've got to say, okay, we're going to have this, it keeps people in jobs and whatever, and I don't like it, but I understand that this opens up a lot more power for me to change the country as a whole, rather than controlling a nuke that we don't even have the bloody password to. I think sometimes you've got to pick your battles, and I think the left need to do that, and so does Jeremy Corbyn and John McDonnell, and maybe make certain allowances. And it's not about compromising yourself and stuff, it's just about being smart. And I think really we have to understand that there is a moralistic part of politics, but there's also a realistic part of politics, and you have to combine the two to win. If you don't, you will see that, why the Greens are where they are. Moralistically, the Greens are great, do you know what I mean? They stand for a lot of good things, but people don't really want that kind of airy-fairy kind of thing. They want a lot of realism injected into their politics, and I think Labour needs to be the party that, can combine the two, and hopefully we'll see this kind of rebranding that Labour can do this and become a force again, really. But one last thing I will say, and I think it's a point that people will criticise me for, is that whether you want to go through like Fleet Street or Whitehall or anywhere, a lot of these people, they don't want Jeremy Corbyn and John McDonnell running the country. They'd much rather have even a Nigel Farage or someone more to the right of Labour. They do not want this to happen. I think people need to kind of realise that this is a system that people like Jeremy Corbyn and John McDonnell are absolute nightmares for. The reason why they get attacked so badly is because they would, if they could, maybe fundamentally change a lot of things, and that's taking a lot of money out of a lot of people's pockets. And once you start to really shape the system like you do, or like they do, you are going to get some massive attacks coming your way. And I looking back now, I don't think I've seen someone so unpopular in the media like Jeremy Corbyn for so long. I don't think there is anybody that is that unpopular. I'm trying to think. Yeah. Well, you might get like maybe someone like Ashley Cole cheating for
Simon Danshek.
But sustained unpopularity, I've never seen anything like it, really. And I know he's done some kind of things that people might think are distasteful, but geez, man, they are not feeling Jeremy Corbyn in the slightest, and that's something that he needs to combat too.
Yeah.
I think we haven't done a podcast yet, but we haven't brought up Brexit in some form.
Yeah.
So, I mean, a good place to start, I guess, would be, what kind of Brexit would you like to see?
You know, if I'm being honest now, the more I look into it, I just don't want it to happen. I've said time it needs to happen, and I still believe that to a degree, that you can't have a vote like this and say, oh, well, you know what, it doesn't look good, actually, we can just cancel it. I don't think people realise that could be some massive repercussions, just socially for the country. You're trying to tell me that people aren't going to kick off and all, I mean, it's a very dangerous decision to make if you do reverse it, but it just seems like I can't see how it's going to work. It's obvious that it's going to be very difficult to implement, and I was reading an article in politics.co.uk that talked about even tariff rate quotas and even just like lamb. It's just so difficult to put through. I can't see this group of people like David Davis and Liam Fox and Boris. I can't see how it's going to work. If we do exit, people have been talking about the Norway style agreement. Maybe that's the best deal that we can get. I don't see why being in the single market is something that you want to kind of be against, but immigration seems to be. I always said that I think that this was basically, and maybe people will disagree, they've got a right to, but a lot of this came down to immigration, and then that's why I think you see the kind of government hamstringing themselves over immigration, because a lot of it is freedom of movement. Freedom of movement. You know, we've seen that they keep on banging on about that and talking about making our own laws and all these kind of things, but really the freedom of movement thing, I think, is a massive impediment in regards to economic prosperity. So I think we need to put it to the people where, okay, we're going to cut immigration, but this is what's going to happen. We are going to struggle economically for a long time, so fair enough, you might get one or two less Albanians or Romanians, whoever in your country, but you are going to suffer economically, so what do you want? But I don't think anyone's being that honest. I think they're using immigrants as political footballs right now and not being honest with the British people about the economic harm that could come through if we do go for a hard Brexit, if we are subject to WTO arrangements, all these kind of things. I don't think people really understand how bad it can get if Brexit is hard and if it isn't negotiated properly, that really it puts you in a worse situation than you were before the referendum, which is surely what Brexit was supposed to avoid. So I would say if you do exit, it's got to be maybe a Norway style agreement, but that involves you paying a lot of money out, which people will complain about. Almost kind of like similar to the Syrian situation in some ways. It's impossible to know what to make of it because we don't know where the government are, if anywhere. We don't know if Labour are going to come with something concrete. We know what the Lib Dems want to do, just block it. But really, it offers no progress, and I think really the best outcome in my ideological mind would be to kind of not brainwash people, kind of just, you know, I don't, if you watched Men in Black where they got that machine where they can make
Yeah.
They would just do that and just forget it ever happened. But if we are going to exit, which I think, you know, part of it says, you know, you still need to do it because you can't have a referendum and because it doesn't go the way you want it to go, just cancel it. I think it sends a terrible message, especially in a time when the candidate I support, Jeremy Corbyn, needs people to be kind of politically engaged as possible and not be apathetic towards it. I think if people are voting and then we're just turning it around anyway, I think it's a bad message for democracy. So Norway style agreement, but really when I say that, I probably need to look even further into what a Norway style agreement actually entails rather than just saying it as well.
I mean, I'm minded to agree with you that I wish we didn't vote leave and I wish we still wouldn't, but obviously that's unrealistic.
Yeah.
But when you said Brexit is happening now, as Theresa May says every single week, I still am not 100% convinced that it will happen because I think that what we're doing now is we're just speculating about how things will go, what kind of deal we'll get. We have no idea when the negotiations actually start, and 2 years, 18 months down the line, we see what we get. Then I think when MPs have a vote on the terms of the deal, then you're not subverting the will of the people. You're making an informed decision based on what the offer is in front of you. If the offer is terrible, if it's really, really, going to be detrimental to the UK, I think MPs, even from constituencies where people voted leave, if they think that it's really going to harm their communities, I think they have a right to block it.
Oh, definitely. I think.
But don't you think that would just feed the kind of Farages of the UK and feed this kind of right-wing populism that says, you know, we voted for Brexit and they're doing everything they can to delay it.
Yeah, I think it's a two-pronged answer, really. I think the first one is that really Brexit just shows you how absolutely ridiculous political discourse is within this country. The politicians that we have and the people linked to them are unable to present coherent and honest messages to the people where they don't trust us to make our own minds up about kind of, you know, unbiased information that we can go, okay, well, if that happens, this happens, and that's how I vote on it. They don't trust us. So we kind of manipulated into kind of like a Punch and Judy style competition where people are slagging each other up and driving around buses with 350 million on them, and people are believing that, and then other people are saying we're going to have an emergency budget. You know, no one really knows what to argue on, so we're all arguing off different hymn sheets, and really everyone's talking rubbish to a certain degree. So I think it highlights how bad the discussion has been around the European Union, and how kind of, you know, we talked about Project Fear. I think everyone used that to a certain degree rather than being honest about the facts and letting people make their own decisions. I think people try to manipulate the public, and that's why you have such a fever pitch type environment in regards to discussing it, because people are very partisan and emotional about it, because rather than just laying facts on the table and letting people decide, people have been doing all kinds of stupid things like driving a bus around and standing in front of posters saying we're full up or whatever it said, or saying that we're going to fall off a cliff straight away and there's going to be a recession 2 days afterwards, or whatever silly things people say, rather than just presenting the facts and letting people make their minds up. I do agree with the fact that if MPs vote against it, it will benefit right-wing populists like Nigel Farage massively. But that's up to the ability of it. And I kind of say it with kind of like a bit of, do they have to do that? But listen, if a politician is going to let something go through that is going to significantly damage their constituency, then they're not doing their job. Because even say 75% of my constituents voted for Brexit, I have to respect that. But if it's going to make you lose your job, do I just agree with you and let you lose your job and then let you come back to me and complain that you don't have a job, or say, I voted for this, I can see how upset you are about it, but let me give you the reasons why. And I will honestly go through them. I would hold events all through my constituency saying, I'm going to make this vote, and I'll take all your rubbish, and I'll take all your crap, and all your whatever it is, and maybe I deserve some of it, but this is why I'm making this decision. And I'll front it in front of you, and they'll get effed and jeffed at and called all kinds of things. But if it helps the constituency, that's the main concern. You have to think about it from this point of view as well. If something damages a constituency decades on due to Brexit, some of these people will be dead and gone in 10, 15, 20 years. You've got to think about other generations of your constituency too. Difficult thing to put across to the public, but I'm not a politician, so
it's true. Statistically, the balance will change, won't it? As more young people become of voting age. If you had to hold the vote in 5 years, I mean, I know you can't hypothesize
just
this, but
delay it for 5 years.
No, it's true. By the time the actual, if it's going to take 10 years for the UK to get a trade deal with the EU, by the time it's actually fully concluded, the balance of people who would have rather stay in and who would have preferred to leave will have changed. We can't say it definitely would have been that we would have remained, but this is the point that the majority of people, not the majority, a large proportion of people who voted for Brexit won't be living with the consequences in the long term.
And I think that's what you got to. But the thing is, though, I think talking about Brexit in an honest manner is quite difficult. I don't know if you guys watch Question Time or something, but they trivialise the issue so much rather than adding actual facts to it and kind of taking context and nuance and stuff. I think people just treat Brexit like it's some very basic argument, like in or out, you can do whatever as a result of that. It's not that simple, and I wish people would stop trying to make it seem like it's the simplest of decisions. If you leave the single market, there are a myriad of issues that you have to deal with as a consequence of that. People like Nigel Farage are very clever at making people think it's very easy, but don't want to go into the nitty-gritty of whatever it is, because he knows a little bit about fishing ports or whatever, or he knows a little bit about the European courts. He forgets to talk about the actual nitty-gritty, where I listened to a podcast, I listened to the Partly Political podcast, and they had a guy on there talking about even the court case about whether it can get forced through Parliament or not, and even that is so complicated, never mind everything that comes with leaving the European Union. So I think really we have to remind people that it's a very, very complex set of negotiations that come on the back of any decision that you take, especially leaving. I think people want to negate the fact that leaving probably will leave us worse off with a massive bill at the end of it, and I think the UK people need to know that. If people still want to go ahead with it, fair enough. Maybe that's the set up for a second referendum, but Jesus, I can't handle another one of them things. They were horrible.
Yeah. You mentioned kind of the core issue, which I agree with you, is immigration, or was immigration. And the fact still remains that the discourse has shifted to immigration. And how do you think the left can kind of recapture this discourse, or shape it, or even change it? What's the way forward?
Say again, sorry, mate. You cut off for a little bit there.
So the discourse has kind of shifted, and the Brexit vote really highlighted it towards immigration and the issues of immigration. So this has put the left and Labour in a defensive position. So how can Labour kind of address this issue and reshape the discourse, or maybe even change it?
I think it's very difficult for Labour to do that, because one thing that we need to admit is that a lot of people in this country are just anti-immigration, and no matter what argument you put forward, they don't want it. It's very interesting for me as well, if you look at the demographics of it. Some of these areas that are so anti-immigration there's been very little effect in regards to immigration on those areas. I think it's our innate fear as kind of some of us over and all these, we've seen it with my grandparents that came over in the 1950s with the Windrush, and the Indian and Pakistanis, and we've seen it like with people from Kosovo in Leeds especially. They got a massive reaction from people in Leeds when they came over, and I think that's just symptomatic of what happens within countries when mass immigration does happen. I think what Labour need to do the first thing Labour needs to do is pick a side. I know it's not the easiest thing to do, because you will alienate different parts of the country by picking a side, but while you're in the middle of it, and some people think that you're one on one, some people think you're the other, I think really you put yourself in a position to get beat up by both sides without having kind of a decent position on the issue at all. If Labour are going to be pro-immigration, which I think they maybe should, because I think it benefits us economically, we need to talk about the benefits and present these benefits to the people of the country. Talk about reintroducing things like the Migrant Impact Fund. Go into areas. I would systematically go out and pick out some of the areas that have been the most affected by immigration, and have people go out there and talk about how, if we implemented such and such policies, how it would help your area. And we actually start telling people how their areas would change, and say, do you know what, you will be possible. I think Paul Mason said it, and I think I've talked about it in the Navarra Media podcast, about just, I think maybe flinging money at these areas as well, and showing them that prosperity can reach them. And it's not the big bad migrants and immigrants that are coming to get them, but it's actually people that are giving tax cuts to corporations and are cutting their benefits and securing lower pay for them, rather than actually trying to get the living wage actually attained. Telling people things like this, I don't think we'll get everybody on board, but we'll give you more people on board than you have now, which is currently quite little, because you're kind of in the middle of everything. I've heard some Labour MPs say it does damage people, some people say it's great. You're in a no man's land, really, and you put yourself in the worst position in probably the most politically toxic argument in the country at the moment, really.
I think also, as well as kind of trying as best you can to explain the benefits to people that immigration can bring, it's also just an issue of people aren't really sure what they're afraid of. I mean, I remember they interviewed one guy after the referendum. He said, fantastic, we're not going to have any more Iraqis coming over here, which makes no sense. But also I think it's a problem. There was that report a couple of weeks ago, the Casey review about integration in the UK, and just how there's so many groups in society that are just not mixing still. And it's in some ways it's down to, so if you're a Polish immigrant, Polish people do often mix with people from their own country, and I think there was I forgot what society it was, the head of a Polish I don't know what it was, a Polish society in London, saying his people also have an onus to try and integrate more in British life. But then I think what I'm getting at is that if you don't understand, if you don't really know who these people are, then it causes an unnatural fear.
Yeah.
If we had more cohesion, more just if we shared the same circles more, I think people would be less afraid. All you see when you hear about Eastern Europeans is the scary stories on the media that you have UKIP people saying that they're rapists, they're murderers. They're normal people like everyone else who are trying to make a living like everyone else. They're not going to steal your job. In fact, they may actually create jobs. But I think we don't talk about that enough.
Yeah, I think the reason why we see that is because immigrants are quite a useful political football. It can be used to kind of scare quite a lot of people because they are the other. And as somebody that is the son of two immigrants, quite low-educated Jamaicans that came here a long time ago, it would be very hypocritical hypocritical, I feel, for me to go, well, they can't do anything, even the unskilled. Well, you've got to kind of take it on its merits and think about, I know it sounds hard, maybe it's a cheap move really, but we have to think about some of the people even people like Cliff Richard were born in India, and Mo Farah, and look at our football teams. We are a very diverse nation. I think we need to take also, and it might pee a lot of people off, but we're not the best at integration ourselves. When you go to places like Spain, and when we go in our expat, they're not immigrants, they're expats. When we talk about our expats, they kind of, close themselves and have their own communities too as well. I think what we need to be realistic about is that a lot of communities do this. I know, like, if you look at the Jamaican population in Leeds, a lot of the Jamaicans still live in the same kind of areas because that's what people do. I think we have to talk about things like, natives fleeing as well. I know I used to live in Bradford, and I spoke to some older Asian people, and they said that, a lot of the people that were here before didn't like us moving into the street, and we wanted to talk to them, but they moved away. There's also the issue of, like, ESOL funding being cut by the government, these people having nowhere to live, and people being holed up in places. These are all issues that we need to kind of think about too. One of my old jobs was a housing support worker, and what I found is that I worked with a lot of people from, say, the Eritrean community, and they just seem to be put like sardines in these blocks of flats rather than actually maybe being put to different areas of Leeds and being introduced to different groups. But the funding has been cut for a lot of this, and it does make integration a lot harder. It's very easy for people like Neil Kinnock, someone was talking about it, kind of assimilation and things. Well, it's not down to people to assimilate, it's about people having the opportunity and the tools to get involved in their community, and language is a big part of that, but also opportunity is another part of that. And I think it's not bad for us to offer immigrants opportunities and prosperity. I think it's just important that we have that across the board, and I think a lot of people don't feel that. A lot of it is just anecdotal, man in a pub story, or this guy came in from, I don't know, Kosovo or wherever and got a 7-bedroom. It doesn't work like that. As someone that's worked in housing, it does not work like that. So I think it's about kind of resetting the narrative for a lot of these kind of, man down the pub stories, and getting people real in regards to what immigration is and how it affects us. If all immigrants in this country down tools for a day, we would be on our asses. It's just a fact of the matter. And I think really we need to kind of make people more aware of how much we do need immigration and how much it can benefit them, and how they can be wealth creators and job stars and all these kind of things too, because it's always amazing me that people with kind of like, and I don't want to be demeaning here, but you've maybe got like 2 GCSEs and you haven't been in school in years yet, you think you should get 40 grand a year to be a cleaner. We need to be realistic about, immigrants and stuff do help us a lot in regards to our low paid jobs as well. I don't think it's them pushing down wages. Tesco ain't paying people X amount of money because they've got a lot of Romanians, and it's because they can get away with that. It's because they get corporate welfare through kind of tax credits and stuff where they can underpay their workers. So it's a massive argument that I think we kind of condense quite a lot to fit our agreements. Maybe it's about Labour widening the argument and going to different places and using different parts of the argument to get people on side. I think you can do, but we also need to be quite adamant that, and I know a lot of people like this, a lot of people don't like the fact that we have immigration on the scale that we do, and no argument's going to change their mind. So you can waste your time doing that, or maybe put your arguments forward and then keep it pushing. Keep your message going, and I think you try and drag along enough people along the way, really. I think I might seem quite blasé about it and going, if they don't agree. But I think too many times what I've seen Labour do is compromise themselves in regards to trying to convince people that are quite headed when they're not going to do that, rather than kind of maybe getting people on board that would have agreed if they would have just kept up one stance the whole way, really. Yeah,
definitely. Well, I think, so we've covered Syria, the US, Brexit, some domestic things. I think we've covered quite a lot in this. I think just one final question I'd have for you is, you said at the beginning that you'd only really recently got involved in politics. I was just wondering, was that alongside Jeremy Corbyn's ascendancy, or what caused you to become more politically active?
No, it all kind of started with Obama, really, and I'm into like kind of my hip hop and stuff, and there was always songs talking about how politics is, and minorities being excluded from politics. So I was always kind of like took notice, and when he came on board, I was like, wow, this guy's talking about hope and change, and things are going to change, and the world's going to be radically different. And I just started taking more and more notice. And maybe I think just before Jeremy Corbyn came on board, it was the last elections, I realised that things were going terribly, because I was working in housing support, and I was working with people with mental health issues and having their benefits cut, and it was working in quite close contact with members of the public that I realised that this government was really harming people. that's why I've begun to get a bit more politically active and stuff. And I just started the channel as just a voice box, really, just to concentrate on things that were doing my head in. I think my first video was about why we don't need a royal family, so it wasn't really that political. It was talking about homophobia and Islamophobia and people having confidence. It wasn't really political. But then the more I found that these issues were intrinsically linked to political decisions, it was kind of a natural transformation, really, where it was, I mean, I'm probably going to get done for this by the Labour Party. I voted for the Green Party the last time. So I didn't think that I was ideologically aligned with people like Ed Balls and Ed Miliband. And I just really got interested in it, started vlogging more about politics and about what's been happening. And Russell Brand, the Truths, had just come out as well. And I just kind of started to talk about it more and more. Jeremy Corbyn came on the scene. I was like, wow, this guy seems a bit different. And then I did more and more research. And now it's just kind of consumed me where, you know, at the time, I think the channel only had like 50 subscribers. You know, and now it feels like I'm becoming like 4 and a bit thousand on Facebook. It's gone quite big now. So I think the man in the streets kind of view on politics and the way I present it and stuff, I think I present it how a lot of people consume it. I don't need like to be dropping lots of acronyms or using lots of big words. I'm just telling people how I view the information, how it makes me feel. Not necessarily that it's the truth all the time and whatever, and I'm some paragon of virtue, but I think a lot of people just have been doing the same as I have, because I think a lot of people have become a lot more political over the years because there's a bigger squeeze on people overall.
Okay, yeah, I think that kind of...
Got an hour of content now.
Yeah, sorry, I do rant on really. So
no, that's what we want. We don't. That's exactly what we want. That's great.
No problem. Well, anytime you guys are over for a chat, again, I'd love to have you on my podcast and my channel as well. I think, you know, I'd love to hear a lot more from you guys from your points of view, because I think I just bloody bullied on there. But you know, really good luck with the podcast. I think you guys are really good guys. I was listening to your last podcast, and I think you got some really good views as well that a lot of people agree with. So, you know, all the best to you guys. I think you got a really good thing coming, really. But like I said, I think you guys, 2017 is a really good time to be coming into it, and I think, you know, you probably be quite surprised how well it goes. It's just been, you know, keep at it and stuff, and, you know, you never know. I'm willing to come on whenever you guys want me if I've got enough time.
I'm amazed you fit it all in.
I am too, but I think the demand flu's killed me, so I'm going to just watch some Tony Benn videos and read the Alex notebooks today.
Nice one.
Well, have a good one. Thanks a lot for taking your time to join us.
No problem, lads. Take care. I'll speak to you soon.
Thanks.
Bye.
And this is what this is about. It's not about electability, it's about missing the good old days. The good old spin-doctoring, warmongering, bush-filleting, Tory-imitating good old days. You know, the new Labour good old days. Fuck integrity, fuck honesty, we just want power.
Venceremos, mil cadenas habrá que romper. Venceremos, venceremos, la miseria sabremos vencer. Venceremos, venceremos, mil cadenas habrá que romper. Venceremos, venceremos, la miseria sabremos vencer. Campesinos, soldados y obreros, la mujer de la patria también, estudiantes, empleados, mineros, cumpliremos con nuestro deber, sembraremos las tierras de gloria, socialista será el porvenir, todos juntos haremos la historia. A cumplir, a cumplir, a cumplir. Venceremos, venceremos, mil cadenas habrá que romper. Venceremos, venceremos, la miseria sabremos vencer.